They say rejection kills slower than poison, but they're wrong. I died the night Alpha Wesley marked me as his mate, not from his bite, but from the 20 years of cruelty that came before it. Every sneer, every laugh, every time someone looked through me like I was nothing more than empty space wearing skin. But here's what they don't tell you about dying. Sometimes you come back stronger. Sometimes you come back dangerous. My name is Willow Ashbourne, and this is the story of how the fat nobody everyone threw away became the one thing that could save them all. How the girl they called useless meat turned out to carry a bloodline so powerful that ancient enemies would burn down the world to possess it. How I went from scrubbing floors in the kitchen to standing beside the most feared alpha in the Northern Territories as his equal, his mate, his Luna. But power comes with a price. Love comes with consequences. And sometimes, when you finally get everything you've ever dreamed of, that's when the real nightmare begins. This is my story. The story of why the Alpha marked me and what it cost us both. Before we dive in, if this is your first time listening to one of our audiobooks, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Stick around until the very end of the video and let me know where in the world you're listening from. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Nobody of the Ancient Pack. The sound of my own breathing was too loud in the silence of the kitchen. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, clutching a tray of leftover meat scraps that would become tomorrow's stew. Through the narrow window, I could hear them, the real wolves of the ancient pack, their laughter sharp as winter wind as they celebrated another successful hunt. Their voices carried stories of glory, of blood spilled and enemies conquered, while I stood here smelling like grease and disappointment. My name is Willow, and I am nothing. Not the sleek, deadly nothing that strikes from shadows. Not the mysterious nothing that commands respect through silence. I'm the soft, round nothing that takes up too much space and not enough air. The nothing that makes other wolves look away, not from fear, but from embarrassment. As if my very existence reminds them that weakness can survive in a pack built for strength. The kitchen door creaked open behind me. Willow, my mother's voice cracked like a whip. Stop hiding and help me with these platters. I turned, watching her nimble hands arrange roasted venison with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of staying invisible. Elena had once been beautiful, everyone said so. Before she mated with my father, a mid-ranking warrior who died in a border skirmish when I was 7. Before she was left with a daughter who couldn't shift properly, couldn't fight, couldn't even look the part of a pack member. The gathering starts soon, she muttered, not meeting my eyes. And for the love of the moon goddess, try not to trip this time. I nodded, swallowing the familiar taste of shame. Last month, I'd stumbled while serving the warriors, sending a pitcher of mead crashing into Beta Marcus's lap. The whole hall had erupted in laughter. Even now, weeks later, wolves still snickered when they saw me coming. We loaded the platters in silence, the weight of unspoken disappointment heavier than the food I carried. Through the kitchen's back entrance, I could see the main courtyard filling with pack members. The ancient pack was one of the strongest in the Northern Territories, our bloodline stretching back to the first wolves who'd learned to hunt as one. Tonight we celebrated the autumn equinox, a time when the strongest among us would be honored and the pack's hierarchy would be reinforced. Alina strode past the window, her auburn hair catching the torchlight like flame. Even from here, I could see the defined muscles in her arms, the confident set of her shoulders. She'd brought down 3 deer in today's hunt, and tomorrow she'd begin advanced combat training. At 19, she was everything I wasn't: fierce, respected, desired. Behind her walked Isabel, blonde and lethal. Her wolf formed so fast that enemies barely saw her coming before their throats were torn out. She laughed at something Alina said, the sound bright and careless. These were the daughters the ancient pack was proud of. These were the future. I was the mistake they pretended didn't exist. Move. my mother hissed, and I realized I'd been standing frozen, watching my betters through the glass like some pathetic voyeur. The great hall buzzed with energy when we entered through the servants' entrance. Long wooden tables groaned under the weight of the feast, and pack members filled every bench, their conversations a symphony of pride and belonging. At the head table sat our leadership, Beta Marcus with his cruel smile, Elder Sarah with her sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a dozen other wolves whose names carried weight in our world. And at the center of it all, Alpha Wesley. Even sitting, he commanded the room. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his green eyes held the kind of intensity that made lesser wolves submit without a word being spoken. He was 25, had been leading the ancient pack for 3 years since his father's death, and in that time, he'd never lost a battle, never shown weakness, never looked at me as anything more than part of the furniture. I kept my head down as I served, moving between tables like a ghost. The platters were heavy, my arms ached, but I'd learned long ago that complaining only made things worse. A few wolves nodded their thanks, the older ones, mostly, who still remembered basic courtesy. The younger warriors barely noticed I existed. "More wine here, girl," called out a voice that made my stomach clench. Beta Marcus, second in command, Wesley's right hand, and the wolf who'd made it his personal mission to remind me of my place. He sat surrounded by his usual crowd. Young males drunk on their own power, females who giggled at his crude jokes. His eyes found mine across the room, and his lips curved in a smile that had nothing warm about it. I approached his table carefully, wine pitcher trembling slightly in my grip. The conversation died as I drew near, and I felt the weight of their attention like physical pressure against my skin. "Look at this," Marcus said, his voice carrying just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Our little kitchen mouse, scurrying around with the real food." Snickers rippled through his group. My cheeks burned, but I kept my expression neutral as I refilled his cup. "Tell me, Willow," he continued, leaning back in his chair. "When you look in the mirror, do you see a wolf? Or just useless meat wrapped in skin?" The words hit like claws to the chest. Around us, conversations quieted as pack members turned to watch. This was entertainment to them, the weekly humiliation of the fat girl who couldn't even shift into a proper wolf form. I started to speak, but Marcus cut me off. "Actually, don't answer that. We all know the truth." His eyes glittered with malice. "You're not pack. You're just taking up space where a real wolf should be." Laughter exploded from his table, spreading outward like wildfire. My vision blurred, but I refused to let them see me cry. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. That's when I felt it, a gaze heavier than all the others combined. I looked up and my breath caught. Alpha Wesley was watching me. His green eyes were cold as winter lakes, his expression unreadable. For a moment that lasted forever, we stared at each other across the chaos of the feast. I waited for something, pity, anger, even disgust. Anything would be better than the emptiness I saw there. Then he looked away, returning to his conversation as if I'd never existed at all. That dismissal hurt worse than Marcus's words. It was one thing to be mocked by a beta drunk on his own cruelty. It was another to be so completely invisible to the one wolf whose opinion mattered most. I finished my duties in silence, ignoring the continued whispers and pointed stares. By the time the feast wound down, my legs ached and my spirit felt scraped raw. I helped my mother clean the kitchen, neither of us speaking about what had happened. What was there to say? This was my life. This was all it would ever be. The pack house settled into quiet as midnight approached. Most wolves were either sleeping off their celebration or had retreated to their rooms for more private festivities. I should have gone to bed, should have buried myself under my thin blankets and tried to forget another night of humiliation. Instead, I found myself walking. The autumn air was crisp against my skin as I stepped outside, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time all day. The moon hung full and silver above the treeline, casting everything in ethereal light. This was when I felt most at peace, when the world was empty and I could pretend, just for a few minutes, that I belonged somewhere. I wandered toward the training grounds, where wooden posts and practice weapons stood like silent sentries. During the day, this place rang with the clash of steel and the growls of wolves testing their strength. Now it was peaceful, almost sacred. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood freeze, part growl, part scream, entirely wrong. I crept toward the noise, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through a gap in the trees, I saw movement in the clearing beyond. Someone was there, thrashing against the ground with violent, uncontrolled motions. I should have run. Should have gone back to the pack house and pretended I'd never heard anything. But something kept me frozen in place, watching through the shadows as the figure convulsed in the moonlight. Then the clouds shifted, and silver light illuminated the scene clearly. Alpha Wesley knelt in the dirt, his body contorting in ways that defied nature. His hands had shifted into claws that tore gouges in the earth, but the rest of him remained human. His face was twisted in agony, sweat pouring down his skin as he fought against something I couldn't see. This wasn't a normal shift. This was something else entirely. Something wrong. His eyes snapped open, and for a terrifying moment, they weren't human at all. They glowed with an unnatural light, wild and unfocused, as if he was looking at a world none of the rest of us could see. A growl tore from his throat, not the controlled sound of an alpha asserting dominance, but the raw cry of something in pain. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Wesley, strong, invincible Wesley, was breaking apart before my eyes. The episode lasted maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Gradually, his breathing slowed, his claws retracted, and his body stopped its violent thrashing. He remained on his knees for a long time after, staring at the torn earth around him with an expression of pure defeat. Then he stood, brushed the dirt from his clothes, and walked back toward the pack house as if nothing had happened. I waited until he was gone before emerging from my hiding spot. The clearing looked like a battlefield, deep gouges in the soil, bark stripped from nearby trees, the scent of fear and rage hanging heavy in the air. As I walked home on unsteady legs, one thought echoed through my mind. I was the only one who knew. The great Alpha Wesley, leader of the ancient pack, terror of our enemies, and symbol of unwavering strength, had a secret. And somehow, the fat nobody who served his meals and scrubbed his dishes was the only witness to his darkest moment. Chapter 2, The Alpha's Secret Weakness. 3 days had passed since I witnessed Wesley's breakdown in the clearing, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The memory haunted me, the way his powerful frame had convulsed like he was fighting an invisible enemy, the inhuman glow in his eyes, the raw agony in his voice. During the day, he moved through the pack house with his usual commanding presence, but I found myself watching for cracks in his armor, searching for signs that the beast I'd seen was lurking just beneath the surface. I wasn't the only one watching him, though I was probably the only one doing it out of concern rather than suspicion. "Did you hear what happened at the border patrol yesterday?" whispered Luna, one of the younger kitchen staff, as we prepared the morning meal. Her voice dropped to barely a breath. 3 of our scouts came back talking about strange howls coming from the Shadowmere territory. Not wolf howls. Something else. My hand stilled on the bread I was kneading. Shadowmere Pack had been our rivals for generations, but they'd been quiet lately. Too quiet. Elder Sarah thinks they're planning something, Luna continued, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. But Marcus keeps saying... She trailed off, biting her lip. Saying what? That maybe they're not the real threat. That maybe the curse everyone whispers about is finally... Enough. My mother's sharp voice cut through the conversation like a blade. She stood in the doorway, her expression thunderous. Kitchen gossip helps no one. Get back to work. Luna ducked her head and hurried away, but I caught the fear in her eyes before she turned. The curse. Even the staff were talking about it now. I'd heard fragments over the past months. Hushed conversations that died when I entered a room, worried glances exchanged between pack elders. Something about Wesley being marked by dark magic, about enemies using supernatural means to weaken our alpha from within. Most wolves dismissed it as enemy propaganda, but after what I'd seen, maybe the whispers weren't entirely wrong. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of preparation and service. I carried trays, refilled water pitchers, and tried to remain invisible while my ears strained to catch every conversation. It was a skill I'd perfected over years of being ignored. People talked freely around me, as if I were just another piece of furniture. That's how I overheard Beta Marcus in the armory. "The attacks are getting worse," he was saying to someone I couldn't see. "3 times this week, and always at night. If the pack finds out their precious alpha is losing his grip." I pressed myself against the wall outside the door, hardly daring to breathe. "Have you tried the silver root extract?" The second voice belonged to Elder Sarah. "Or perhaps a stronger binding ritual." "Nothing works for long, and the physical evidence is getting harder to hide. Yesterday I found claw marks gouged into the stone walls of his chambers, deep enough to draw sparks. My blood chilled. Wesley was having episodes in his own room now, not just in the forest. How long before someone else discovered his secret? "The Shadowmere spies are already spreading rumors," Sarah continued. "They're calling him unstable, unfit to lead. If this continues, then we'll need to consider alternatives." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I backed away from the door on trembling legs, my mind reeling. They were talking about replacing Wesley. Our alpha, the strongest leader the ancient pack had seen in generations, was slowly being destroyed by something beyond his control. And I was still the only one who truly knew how bad it was getting. The rest of the day crawled by. I went through the motions of my duties, but my attention was elsewhere, cataloging details I'd been too naive to notice before. The way Wesley's jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking. The barely perceptible tremor in his hands during the evening meal. The dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But there were other things too. Strange things. The water in the wash basins had an odd metallic smell that hadn't been there a week ago. When I went to collect dirty linens from the warrior barracks, I found dried herbs tucked between the mattresses, wolfsbane and nightshade, plants that were supposed to ward off dark magic. Someone had been placing them throughout the pack house, but whoever it was clearly wasn't succeeding. Most telling were the scratches. They were everywhere once I started looking. Gouges in wooden door frames, parallel lines scraped across stone walls, deep furrows in the packed earth outside Wesley's window. Always in sets of 4 or 5. Always too deep and too violent to be accidental. The pack's maintenance crew worked overtime to sand them down or cover them with tapestries, but new ones appeared faster than they could be hidden. Everyone pretended not to see them. It was easier that way. As evening approached, I made a decision that terrified me. I was going to follow Wesley tonight. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings. If I was caught spying on the Alpha, the consequences would be severe. Banishment if I was lucky. But I couldn't shake the image of his tormented face from 3 nights ago, or the defeated slump of his shoulders afterward. Something was hunting him from the inside, and no one else seemed willing or able to help. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was the delusion of a lonely girl desperate to feel useful. But I had to try. I waited until the pack house settled into its nighttime quiet before slipping from my room. The hallways were dimly lit by scattered torches, creating pools of light separated by stretches of shadow. Perfect for someone who'd spent her life learning to be invisible. Wesley's chambers were on the 3rd floor, in the Alpha's wing where I had no business being. But I'd delivered meals there before when he was too busy to come to the Great Hall, so I knew the layout. More importantly, I knew which floorboards creaked and which window alcoves offered the best hiding spots. I'd barely reached the 2nd floor when I heard it. That same inhuman sound that had frozen my blood in the clearing. But this time it was coming from above, muffled by stone and wood but unmistakable. He was having another episode. My feet moved before my brain could stop them, carrying me up the final flight of stairs toward the source of the noise. Wesley's door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see flickering candlelight dancing wildly, as if something was thrashing around the room. The sounds grew worse, growls that dissolved into screams, the crash of furniture being overturned, the scrape of claws against stone. How was no one else hearing this? How was no one coming to help? Then I realized why. The Alpha's wing was warded with silent spells, designed to give the pack leader privacy for sensitive meetings. The magic was meant to keep sounds in, not out, but it was strong enough to muffle even this supernatural rage to anyone more than a few yards away. I was probably the only person in the entire pack house who could hear him suffering. Through the crack in the door, I caught glimpses of movement. Wesley's massive form writhed on the floor, his body caught between human and wolf in a transformation that looked like pure agony. His claws, longer and sharper than any normal wolf's, tore at his own skin, leaving bloody tracks across his chest and arms. But it was his eyes that broke my heart. They glowed with that same unnatural light I'd seen in the clearing, but this time I could see the human consciousness trapped behind them. Wesley was still in there, aware and helpless as something else controlled his body. The episode seemed to be getting worse. His movements became more violent, more destructive. A heavy wooden chair exploded into splinters when he crashed into it. Deep gouges appeared in the stone wall where his claws scraped. Blood began to pool on the floor from his self-inflicted wounds. He was going to kill himself at this rate. I don't remember making the decision to enter. One moment I was hiding in the hallway. The next I was pushing through his door and stepping into chaos. The room reeked of rage and fear and something else, something cold and unnatural that made my wolf instinct scream at me to run. Wesley had collapsed near his bed, his body convulsing as waves of whatever was possessing him crashed through his system. Up close, the transformation was even more horrifying. His bones seemed to shift and resettle beneath his skin, his muscles bulging and contracting in patterns that defied anatomy. The glow in his eyes pulsed like a heartbeat, and when he opened his mouth, the sound that emerged belonged to no earthly creature. I should have been terrified. Any sane person would have run screaming from the room. But all I felt was a crushing need to help him, to somehow ease the torture I saw written in every line of his face. So I did the most foolish, dangerous thing I could possibly do. I reached out and touched him. My hand landed on his shoulder, and the effect was instantaneous. The violent thrashing stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. The unholy glow faded from his eyes, replaced by confused green that was blessedly, recognizably human. His breathing slowed from desperate gasps to something approaching normal. For a moment that stretched like eternity, we stared at each other in the flickering candlelight. Wesley's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that might have been relief before settling on a mask of cold fury. "What?" he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Are you doing here?" Chapter 3. The Nobody Who Calmed the Alpha. I should have run, should have stammered an apology, and fled back to the safety of my small room and smaller life. Instead, I found myself frozen under Wesley's intense stare, my hand still resting on his bloodied shoulder. I heard. My voice came out as barely a whisper. "I heard you in pain." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. In the candlelight, with his dark hair disheveled and his shirt torn from his claws, he looked younger somehow. Vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but the anger had drained from his voice, leaving only exhaustion. "Neither should whatever was trying to tear you apart." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched him process what had just happened. His gaze moved from my face to my hand on his shoulder, then back again. I could practically see him putting the pieces together. The sudden cessation of his episode, the strange calm that had settled over him the moment I'd made contact. How? The single word carried the weight of desperate hope and crushing fear. I don't know. It was the truth. I had no idea why my touch had affected him, only that it had. But it worked, didn't it? Wesley pushed himself into a sitting position, wincing as the movement pulled at his self-inflicted wounds. Blood seeped through the tears in his shirt, and without thinking, I reached toward one of the deeper gashes on his arm. Don't. His hand caught my wrist, but his grip was gentle rather than restraining. You've done enough. The dismissal stung, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to send me away. His pride demanded it. But he couldn't deny what had just happened any more than I could. Wesley. Alpha, he corrected sharply. Whatever you think you saw here, whatever you think you did, this conversation never happened. Do you understand me? I pulled my hand free and stood, smoothing down my simple dress with trembling fingers. Of course, Alpha. Just like the episode in the clearing 3 nights ago never happened either. His entire body went rigid. You were there. I was walking. I heard sounds. And you said nothing. His voice carried a dangerous edge now, the Alpha reasserting himself. To no one. Who would believe the fat nobody from the kitchens? The words came out bitter, but they were true. Besides, it's your secret to tell. We stared at each other in the flickering light, and I saw the exact moment he made his decision. It was written in the tightening of his jaw, the straightening of his shoulders, the way his eyes hardened into green ice. From now on, you'll work in the Alpha Wing, he said. Cleaning, serving meals, whatever needs doing. You'll be available. Heat flooded my cheeks. Available for what? Don't flatter yourself. The cruel words hit their mark, but something in his expression softened them slightly. You'll be nearby. In case you need someone to calm the beast, I finished. He flinched at the blunt assessment. Yes. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even really an order, despite his authoritative tone. It was the desperate act of a drowning man grabbing for anything that might keep him afloat. And despite the humiliation of being reduced to a supernatural security blanket, I felt something flutter in my chest that might have been purpose. I'll do it, I said. 3 days later, the whispers started. It began innocently enough. Pack members commenting on how calm Wesley seemed lately, how his legendary temper appeared to have cooled. Then someone noticed that his improved mood coincided with my increased presence in the Alpha Wing. Soon, theories began spreading through the ancient pack like wildfire. Maybe she's drugging his food, suggested Isabel during combat training, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard where I was hanging laundry. Or using some kind of herb magic, added Alina, landing a vicious kick on her practice dummy. My grandmother always said the weak ones sometimes turn to witchcraft. Witchcraft? Marcus's laugh was sharp as broken glass. That pathetic creature couldn't hex her way out of a paper bag. There's got to be another explanation. But as the days passed and Wesley's episodes became less frequent and less violent when they did occur, the speculation grew darker. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my new duties in the Alpha Wing. Wesley had given me a small room near his chambers, ostensibly for convenience, but really so I could reach him quickly when the darkness took hold. The space was 10 times larger than my old quarters, with an actual window and furniture that hadn't been discarded by someone else first. It should have felt like a promotion. Instead, it felt like a beautiful cage. Wesley himself remained coldly professional during our interactions. He'd nod when I brought his meals, grunt acknowledgement when I cleaned his study, and ignore me completely unless another episode struck. Then, for those brief moments when my touch drove away whatever supernatural poison was eating him alive, he'd look at me with something that might have been gratitude before the walls slammed back up. It was during one of these episodes, a particularly violent one that had left his desk in splinters, that everything changed. I'd managed to calm him as usual, my hands on his temples while he knelt on the floor, breathing heavily. But this time, when the glow faded from his eyes and his human consciousness returned, he didn't immediately pull away. Your hands are shaking, he said quietly. I looked down and saw he was right. The tremors had started a few minutes into the episode and hadn't stopped. It's nothing. It's not nothing. His voice was different, softer than I'd ever heard it. This is taking something out of you, isn't it? I wanted to lie, to maintain the pretense that my help came without cost. But the exhaustion that had been building over the past weeks chose that moment to crash over me like a wave. My vision grayed at the edges, and I swayed where I knelt. Wesley's hands shot out to steady me, and for the first time since I'd known him, his touch was gentle. Willow. The way he said my name, not dismissively, not with barely concealed disgust, but like it actually meant something, made tears spring to my eyes. I'm fine, I whispered. No, you're not. His thumb brushed across my cheek, and I realized one of those tears had escaped. You're killing yourself trying to save me. Better than watching you kill yourself. The words hung between us in the candlelit quiet, too honest and too raw. Wesley's green eyes searched my face like he was seeing me for the first time. Not the fat nobody who served his meals, but a person who'd chosen to stand between him and his demons at cost to herself. Why? He asked. Because someone should. That's not an answer. I met his gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Because I care about you. Even if you can't stand the sight of me most days, I care. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, confusion, and underneath it all, a hunger that made my breath catch. His hand was still cupping my face, his thumb tracing patterns on my skin that sent electricity dancing through my veins. Willow, he said again, and this time it sounded like a prayer. He was leaning closer, and my eyes were drifting shut when the sound of splintering would exploded through the room. We sprang apart as the door to Wesley's chambers burst inward, hanging crooked on its hinges. Through the gap stepped three figures I didn't recognize. Wolves in dark clothing with eyes that held too much intelligence and too little warmth. Well, well, said the leader, a tall man with silver hair and a smile like a knife. What do we have here? Wesley was on his feet in an instant, placing himself between me and the intruders. Grayson, I should have smelled Shadowmere filth the moment you crossed our territory. So these were enemies. My blood chilled as I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the far wall. Now, Wesley, Grayson purred. No need for hostility. We're here on a diplomatic mission. Breaking into my private chambers is diplomacy. When you've been hiding something this interesting, yes. Grayson's cold gaze slid past Wesley to land on me, and I felt like prey being studied by a predator. Hello, little mouse. She's nothing, Wesley said quickly. A servant. She was just. Lying doesn't suit you, Alpha. The second intruder spoke now, a lean man with dark hair and predator's eyes. We've been watching for weeks. Every time you have one of your episodes, she's the one who calms you down. That's not the work of an ordinary servant. Elliot's right, Grayson agreed. And after some very interesting research into bloodlines and genealogies, we discovered something fascinating about little Willow here. My mouth went dry. What are you talking about? Grayson's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Tell me, darling, what do you know about your grandmother? Your mother's mother, specifically? She died when I was young, I whispered. Why would that matter? Because Elena Ashbourne was the last known member of the Moonweaver line, a bloodline that was supposedly extinct. His eyes glittered with malevolent satisfaction. A bloodline that carried the rare gift of breaking supernatural toxins and curses. The room spun around me. That's impossible. Is it? Tell me, how else would you explain your ability to calm an alpha who's been poisoned with shadow essence? How else would you explain why touching you drives away the darkness that's been eating him alive? Wesley made a sound like a wounded animal. Shadow essence? You bastards. Did you really think we'd challenge the ancient pact through conventional warfare? Elliot laughed. Why lose lives when we could simply corrupt your alpha from within? One drop in his water supply every few days, and the strongest leader in the Northern Territories becomes a liability to his own pack. But we never expected this. Grayson gestured toward me with genuine admiration. A bloodline power awakening just when it was needed most. Your little nobody here is quite literally your salvation, Wesley. And now she's coming with us, the third intruder said, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough, like gravel over steel. along with that pretty little gift of hers. Over my dead body, Wesley snarled, and I felt the power rolling off him in waves. That can be arranged, Grayson replied pleasantly, but it would be such a waste. Think of it as a trade. The girl's life for your pack's continued existence. After all, without her to cleanse the poison from your system, how long do you think you'll last? How long before you tear apart everyone you're supposed to protect? The horrible logic of it crashed over me like ice water. They were right. Without me, Wesley would fall to whatever they'd done to him. And without Wesley, the ancient pact would crumble. But if I went with them, don't even think about it, Wesley said, reading my expression. I won't trade you for anything. Even your pack. Grayson asked sweetly. Even my pack. The conviction in his voice made my heart soar, even as terror flooded my veins. But I couldn't let him sacrifice everything for someone like me. I couldn't be the reason the ancient pact fell. I'll go, I said quietly. Willow, no. I'll go, I repeated, louder this time. But I want your word that you'll stop poisoning him. That you'll leave the ancient pack alone. Absolutely not, Grayson said, his smile never wavering. We're not negotiating, little mouse. We're simply taking what we want. That's when Wesley's control finally snapped. The roar that tore from his throat shook dust from the ceiling, and his eyes blazed with that familiar unnatural light. But this time it wasn't the poison driving his rage. It was pure, protective fury. Then you'll have to take her from my dead body, he snarled. And in that moment, as Wesley prepared to fight 3 enemy wolves to protect the nobody who'd somehow become his everything, I finally understood what I meant to him. I wasn't just his cure. I was his mate. Chapter 4. Rejected Mate or Fated Mate. The fight lasted exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. I know because I counted every heartbeat, every clash of claws against flesh, every drop of blood that painted Wesley's chamber walls crimson. 3 enemy wolves against 1 alpha should have been suicide for Wesley, especially weakened as he was by weeks of poison. But rage had a way of making monsters out of even the strongest men. When it was over, Grayson and his companions were dead, and Wesley stood among their bodies like some ancient god of war, magnificent and terrible and completely covered in gore that wasn't entirely his own. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice rough from battle roars. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. I'd seen Wesley fight before during pack training, but this had been different. This had been personal, lethal. The way he'd torn into the Shadowmere wolves spoke of a protectiveness that went beyond duty or politics. The way a mate would fight for his female. But as the adrenaline faded and reality set in, doubt crept into my mind like poison. Wesley had called me his mate in the heat of the moment, but did he mean it? Or was I just reading hope into desperation? We need to tell the pack what happened, Wesley said, already moving toward his wardrobe to find a clean shirt. They need to know about the poisoning, about Shadowmere's real strategy. And about me? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He paused, his back still turned to me. What about you? About what I am. What I can do. I swallowed hard. About us. The silence stretched so long I started to wonder if he'd heard me. When he finally turned around, his expression was carefully blank, the same mask he'd worn for years whenever he looked at me. There is no us, Willow. The words hit like physical blows. But you said... I said I wouldn't trade you. That doesn't make you my mate. His voice was cold, clinical. You have a gift that keeps me stable. That makes you valuable to the pack. Nothing more. Valuable. Like a tool. Like a weapon to be used when needed and put away when not. I see. I kept my voice steady through sheer force of will. Then I suppose I should return to my duties. I made it halfway to the door before he spoke again. Willow. The gentleness in his tone almost broke me. You have to understand. The pack would never accept. Accept what? That their perfect alpha needs the fat nobody to keep him sane. I turned back to face him, letting all the hurt and anger bleed into my voice. Or that he might actually feel something for her? Both, he said quietly. At least he was honest. It should have hurt less, knowing that his rejection came from practical concerns rather than personal disgust. Somehow it hurt more. Then we understand each other perfectly, Alpha. This time, when I left his chamber, he didn't call me back. News of the Shadowmere infiltration spread through the pack like wildfire, but the story that reached most ears had been carefully edited. 3 enemy spies had been discovered and eliminated. The poisoning plot had been revealed and neutralized. Alpha Wesley was recovering and would address the pack soon. My role in any of it went unmentioned. That should have been the end of it, a return to my invisible existence, serving meals and scrubbing floors while Wesley went back to ignoring me. But pack dynamics are never that simple, especially when wolves have keen noses and sharp eyes. It didn't take long for someone to notice that the Alpha's recovery coincided with increased sightings of me in the Alpha Wing, that his legendary composure seemed to crack whenever I wasn't nearby, that I'd moved from the servant quarters to a room 3 doors down from his chambers. The whispers started again, but this time they carried a sharper edge. "She's gotten above herself," Isabel declared during a training session, her voice pitched to carry across the courtyard. "Kitchen maids don't belong in the Alpha Wing." "Maybe she knows something she shouldn't," suggested Alina, landing a particularly vicious blow on her practice dummy. "Maybe that's why Wesley keeps her close. Or maybe she's exactly what she's always been," Marcus added with a cruel smile. "A nothing trying to be something." I tried to ignore them, focusing on my duties while my heart slowly calcified in my chest. But when Elder Sarah pulled me aside after the evening meal, I knew the whispers had reached dangerous ears. "There are concerns," she said without preamble, "about your elevated position." "I'm not sure what you mean, Elder." Her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Don't play coy, child. Half the pack is speculating about why Alpha Wesley has suddenly developed a taste for keeping servants in the Alpha Wing. The other half wonders if you've bewitched him somehow. And what do you think?" "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that you're more than you appear to be. But I also think that more might be dangerous to pack stability." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Stay in line or face consequences." That night, I lay in my 2 large beds staring at the ceiling and wondering if Wesley had been right to reject the mate bond. Maybe I was deluding myself. Maybe what I'd felt between us was just wishful thinking from a lonely girl desperate for connection. Maybe I really was nothing. The attack came 3 days later during the full moon gathering. The ancient pack had assembled in the great courtyard for our monthly celebration, a night of running, hunting, and reinforcing the bonds that made us strong. Wesley stood at the center of it all, magnificent in the silver light, addressing his wolves with the easy authority of a born leader. I watched from the edges, as always, part of the pack but never truly belonging, close enough to see but too far to touch. That's why I saw the shadows moving before anyone else did. They came from the forest like liquid darkness, dozens of Shadowmere wolves pouring through our defenses with the precision of a military operation. But these weren't the stealthy spies who'd infiltrated Wesley's chambers. These were warriors, and they'd come for blood. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Claws flashed in the moonlight, snarls echoed off stone walls, and the scent of violence flooded the air. Our wolves fought valiantly, but the enemy had the advantage of surprise and superior numbers. And in the center of it all, Wesley battled like a man possessed. He was glorious and terrible, cutting through enemy ranks with deadly efficiency. But I could see what others missed, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his movements slowed after each kill, the growing pallor of his skin. The poison might have been neutralized, but weeks of supernatural toxin had taken their toll. He was fighting on reserves that were rapidly depleting. When the massive Shadowmere enforcer, easily twice Wesley's size, broke through our defensive lines and charged straight for our Alpha, I knew with sick certainty that Wesley wouldn't be fast enough to dodge. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. I saw the enforcer's claws extend, saw Wesley turn just a heartbeat too late, saw the trajectory that would open his throat and end everything. I moved without thinking. Power exploded from me like white-hot lightning, racing across the courtyard in a wave that made every wolf, friend and foe alike, stagger. The enforcer's charge faltered as my energy slammed into him. But more than that, something fundamental shifted in the air around us. The shadows that had been giving the enemy wolves their unnatural speed suddenly dissipated. The red glow in their eyes, the same supernatural light I'd seen in Wesley's during his episodes, flickered and died. Whatever dark magic had been enhancing their abilities crumbled under the weight of my unleashed gift. But the cost was immediate and brutal. Pain lanced through my skull like hot knives, and my vision grayed at the edges. I felt myself falling, the world spinning away as my body paid the price for channeling power I barely understood. The last thing I saw before consciousness left me was Wesley's face, his green eyes wide with shock, and something that might have been awe. When I woke up, the entire pack was staring at me. I was lying on a makeshift bed in the great hall, surrounded by wolves in various states of injury and exhaustion. The battle was over, our victory evident in the absence of enemy bodies and the weary satisfaction on our warriors' faces. But every single pair of eyes in the room was fixed on me with expressions ranging from wonder to fear. "She's awake," someone whispered. "The power, did you see it? Like nothing I've ever felt before. Is she even really one of us?" Wesley appeared at my side, kneeling beside the bed with careful precision. His shirt was torn and blood-stained, but he was alive. "Whole. Safe. How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Like I've been hit by lightning," I admitted. "Inside and out." "That's probably accurate." His voice carried an odd note I couldn't identify. "What you did, what you are, it changes everything." I struggled to sit up, ignoring the way the movement made my head pound. "What I am is still the same person I was yesterday." "No," said a new voice. Elder Sarah stepped into view, her expression grave. "Yesterday you were Elena's daughter, a servant of no particular importance. Today, you're the last Moonweaver. Today, you're the wolf who saved our Alpha and turned the tide of battle." Murmurs rippled through the assembled pack, some awed, some uncertain, all carrying the weight of a world that had suddenly shifted beneath our feet. "Today," Sarah continued, "you're someone our enemies would kill to possess and our allies would kill to protect." The implications hit me like another wave of power. My secret was out. The careful anonymity that had been my only protection was gone, burned away in the moment I'd chosen to save Wesley's life. "What happens now?" I asked. Wesley's jaw tightened. "Now we deal with the consequences." But as his gaze met mine across the sea of watching faces, I saw something in his green eyes that made my breath catch. Not resignation or duty or the cold calculation I'd grown used to. Recognition, acceptance, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something that looked like love. The pack might never accept me as Luna. The other alphas might see me as a threat to be eliminated. But for the first time since I'd touched Wesley in his chambers and calmed his supernatural rage, I thought we might actually have a chance. If we could survive what was coming next. Chapter 5, The Mark. The war council lasted 3 hours, but I felt every minute like a blade against my skin. Wesley had called together the pack's senior members the morning after my public display of power, and despite being the center of discussion, I sat silent in the corner while they debated my fate. Some argued I was too valuable to risk in combat. Others insisted I was too dangerous to trust. A few suggested I should be sent away entirely for my own protection, they claimed, though their eyes said otherwise. Through it all, Wesley remained coldly analytical, discussing my abilities like I was a weapon to be deployed rather than a person who'd nearly died saving his life. The Moonweaver bloodline changes our strategic position significantly, Elder Sarah was saying. Other packs will either want to ally with us to gain access to her power, or eliminate us to prevent her from being used against them. Assuming she can control it, Beta Marcus interjected with his usual sneer. Yesterday's display nearly killed her. What use is a weapon that destroys itself? She's not a weapon, Wesley said quietly, and something in his tone made the entire room fall silent. Then what is she? Demanded Marcus. Wesley's green eyes found mine across the room, and for a moment, the careful mask slipped. I saw exhaustion there and uncertainty and something deeper that made my heart race despite everything. "She's Pack," he said finally, "and Pack protects Pack." It wasn't a declaration of love or an acknowledgement of the mate bond that hummed between us like electricity, but it was more than I'd dared hope for, and the warmth that spread through my chest felt like the first ray of sunshine after endless winter. The meeting broke up with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. My life had changed irrevocably. I was no longer the invisible servant girl. For better or worse, I was now a person of significance. That significance made me a target. The first attempt came 2 days later. Poison in my evening meal that would have been fatal if my Moonweaver blood hadn't burned it out of my system before it could take hold. The second was a training accident that sent a silver-tipped arrow whistling past my ear. The third was a loose stone in the stairwell that would have sent me tumbling to my death if Wesley hadn't caught me at the last second. "This has to stop," he growled, his hand still gripping my waist from where he'd pulled me to safety. "It's not your problem," I said, but even I didn't believe the words. "Like hell it's not." His fingers tightened on my waist, and I could feel the tremor in his hands that meant another episode was building. "You're mine to protect." "Am I?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Or am I just yours to use?" Pain flashed across his features. "Willow, don't." I pulled free of his grip, backing toward my room. "Don't say things you don't mean. We both know where we stand." But as I closed the door behind me, I heard him whisper my name like a prayer, and my traitorous heart leaped with hope I couldn't quite kill. The final attack came during the next full moon hunt, a coordinated assault by Shadowmere's remaining forces that caught us scattered and vulnerable in the deep forest. They'd been planning this for months, using our own hunting patterns against us, and by the time we realized the trap, it was too late to retreat. The battle was brutal and chaotic, nothing like the organized combat in our courtyard. Here, wolves fell on each other in savage fury, and the scent of blood turned the forest floor slick and treacherous. I stayed close to the other non-combatants at first, but when I saw Wesley surrounded by 3 massive Shadowmere enforcers, all my survival instincts abandoned me. I ran toward the fight, just as one of the enforcers landed a devastating blow across Wesley's ribs. He staggered, blood streaming from the wound, and I saw the familiar glow beginning to build behind his eyes as pain triggered another episode. Not now. Not here. Surrounded by enemies who would exploit any moment of weakness. "Wesley!" I screamed his name, but he was already lost to the supernatural rage that turned him into something wild and uncontrolled. His claws extended to their full, unnatural length, and he launched himself at the nearest enemy with inhuman fury. But the frenzied state made him sloppy, predictable. The enforcers adapted quickly, using his blind rage against him, herding him toward a cluster of silver-tipped spears their packmates held ready. I reached them just as Wesley stumbled into the trap. Time crystallized into perfect, terrible clarity. I saw the spears angled toward his heart, saw the Shadowmere wolves' triumphant grins, saw the glazed madness in Wesley's eyes that meant he couldn't even recognize the danger. I threw myself between them without hesitation. My hands found Wesley's face just as the spears thrust forward, and power exploded from me in a wave that turned night to blazing day. But this time was different. This time, instead of just cleansing supernatural toxins, I felt something deeper stir within my blood. Something ancient and primal that recognized the wolf before me as mine to protect, mine to heal, mine to claim. The mate bond. It snapped into place between us like a steel cable, connecting our souls in ways I'd never imagined possible. Through that link, I poured everything I had into Wesley, my strength, my power, my very life force, burning away the poison-induced madness and filling the empty spaces with light. His eyes cleared instantly, the glow fading to reveal familiar green that widened with shock as he realized what was happening. Around us, the Shadowmere wolves staggered backward as my unleashed power washed over them, cleansing their enhanced abilities and leaving them as ordinary and suddenly outmatched as any other enemy. But the effort was killing me. I felt my life draining away through the bond, my strength flowing into Wesley until there was nothing left. My vision blurred, my legs gave out, and I would have collapsed if not for Wesley's arms catching me against his chest. "Willow, no," he whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave me." "Had to," I managed through lips that felt numb and cold. "Had to save you. You stubborn, impossible woman." His voice cracked with emotion I'd never heard before. "I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I finally understand." He never finished the sentence, but I felt the truth through our bond. Love, desperate and fierce and real. Regret for all the time we'd wasted. Terror at the thought of losing what we'd just found. The battle raged around us, but Wesley held me like I was the most precious thing in his world, his lips moving in what might have been prayers or curses or both. Through the mate bond, I felt his strength flowing back into me, supporting what little life I had left. "Mark me," I whispered. His entire body went rigid. "What? Mark me?" I forced my eyes to focus on his face, memorizing every line in case this was the last chance I'd get. "Before I die, make it real." "You're not going to die," he said fiercely. "I won't let you. Mark me anyway." For a heartbeat that lasted eternity, he stared into my eyes. Then his hand curved around my neck, thumb brushing over the pulse point where a mate's bite would seal our bond forever. "Are you sure?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Once this is done, there's no going back. You'll be Luna of the ancient pack. You'll be mine and I'll be yours, and the whole world will know it. I've been yours since the moment I touched you in that clearing," I whispered. "I was just waiting for you to realize it." Something broke open in Wesley's expression, walls crashing down, mass shattering, leaving nothing but raw, honest love shining in his green eyes. "Mine," he growled, and sank his teeth into my throat. Power exploded between us as the mate bond completed, but this time it felt like coming home, like finding the missing piece of my soul and snapping it back into place. Strength flowed through the connection, his supernatural abilities merging with my Moonweaver gifts to create something entirely new. The effect on the battle was immediate and dramatic. Light blazed from our joined forms, washing over the entire battlefield in a wave that sent every Shadowmere wolf to their knees. But more than that, our combined power seemed to awaken something in our own pack members, unity of purpose that transformed them from individual fighters into a single, unstoppable force. Within minutes, the enemy was routed completely. Wesley pulled back from my throat, his eyes blazing with triumph and possessive satisfaction. "How do you feel?" I took inventory carefully. The exhaustion was gone, burned away by our completed bond. In its place was a strength I'd never imagined, his alpha power flowing through me, while my Moonweaver abilities enhanced his natural gifts beyond anything he'd possessed before. "Like I could take on the world," I admitted. "Good," he said, helping me to my feet. "Because we're about to face it together." The pack had gathered around us during our bonding, and I could see shock and awe warring in their expressions. Isabel's mouth hung open in disbelief. Alina looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Even Marcus seemed too stunned to speak. Wesley stood slowly, pulling me up beside him, his arm around my waist proclaiming our bond to anyone with eyes to see. "Behold your Luna," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the forest quiet. "Willow Ashbourne, last of the Moonweaver line, my chosen mate and the female who will stand beside me as we lead this pack into the future." Silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then, slowly, Elder Sarah dropped to one knee. "Luna," she said formally. One by one, the rest of the pack followed suit, even those who had whispered against me just days before. The sight of dozens of wolves kneeling in the moonlight, acknowledging me not as the fat nobody from the kitchens, but as their leader, their Luna, was almost too much to process. Wesley's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining as we stood together before our pack. "Rise," he commanded. "All of you. We have much work to do." As the wolves got to their feet, I felt a moment of perfect, crystalline happiness. This was everything I'd never dared dream of. Acceptance, belonging, love, purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was home. That's when the messengers stumbled into the clearing. The young wolf was barely conscious, his clothes torn and bloodied, his eyes wild with terror and exhaustion. He collapsed at Wesley's feet, gasping for air that seemed to burn his lungs. Alpha, he wheezed. Message from the Northern Territories. Wesley knelt beside him immediately. What happened? Who sent you? The Winterfang pack, the messenger managed. They're all dead. Every last one of them. Ice flooded my veins. The Winterfang pack was one of the strongest in the region, nearly as powerful as our own. If something had wiped them out completely, who did this? Wesley demanded. The messenger's eyes found mine across the short distance, and what I saw there made my blood freeze. Not who, he whispered. What? Something ancient. Something hungry. And before Alpha Winterfang died, he got word to us. The young wolf swallowed hard, his next words barely audible. It's coming for her. The Moonweaver. They say it's been waiting centuries for one of her bloodline to awaken. They say it feeds on power like hers, and it won't stop until every last drop of Moonweaver blood is consumed. The perfect happiness I'd felt moments before shattered like glass. Around us, the pack shifted uneasily, sensing a threat they couldn't yet comprehend. Wesley's arm tightened around me protectively. How long do we have? Days, the messenger breathed. Maybe less. It's already crossed the northern border. Nothing slows it down. Nothing stops it. And Alpha, his voice dropped to a terrified whisper. It knows her scent now. It can track her anywhere. As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed from somewhere far to the north, but this wasn't the sound any wolf had ever made. This was something older, hungrier, infinitely more dangerous. Something that had been sleeping for generations and was now awake. Something that was coming for me. Wesley's hand found my face, tilting my chin up until our eyes met. Whatever's coming, he said quietly, we'll face it together. I nodded, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. After a lifetime of being nobody, I'd finally found everything I'd ever wanted. Now I had to pray we'd all survive long enough to keep it. If you enjoyed this werewolf romance audiobook, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more romance audiobooks like this one. See you in the next one.